Okay, everyone. So thank you for making it. There are still a few people trickling in, I think, but we'll just get started at this point. So yeah, today we're going to go through a quick deck explaining what the Foundry program is, how you can build Arweave decentralized web applications, the different streams we have going on, then some kind of program specifics that Seb and Jesse will get into at the end. So I'll just share my screen. And yeah, here we go. So I think the first thing to say is welcome to the PermaWeb. The Open Web Foundry programs have been a sort of core part of the development of the profit sharing community and PermaWeb application ecosystem over the last year. It's been kind of a nexus of some of the most amazing things that have been happening in the ecosystem. So we're very, very, very excited to be getting started with the 4th rendition this time, which brings us to the first point, which is a congratulations to a number of the projects. Actually, almost all of the projects from Foundry Batch 2 have now gone on to raise serious capital and have quit their jobs and are essentially building on the PermaWeb full time at this point. I know some of them are in the audience, so I just wanted to say really, like, congratulations. It's so cool to see you guys on this journey. So another thing to note is that the Foundry program is expanding. When we started this, there were just like 15 projects that were coming in at a time. And now Seb and Jesse will have to, I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're looking at something like 40 or 50 serious projects that have already approached us about being in this Foundry batch, which is absolutely incredible. And it means we have to kind of change the way we're doing a couple of things. But yeah, we're just super excited to have everyone here. So now there's going to be 2 different tracks in the Foundry program. There's going to be one for profit sharing decentralized web applications, which has been what we've traditionally focused on, as well as a second track for Arweave purely as a storage layer for other applications that are doing various things, from DeFi to NFTs, and I guess everything in the middle. So the storage track you could think of as Open Web Foundry Lite. The idea here is that we really just get you all of the information you need in order to integrate Arweave into your systems, get access to some free storage credits for your application to get started, and get you as much exposure as we possibly can to new users, collaborators, and eventually investors. So this is going to be a much lower time commitment track. Really, actually, integrating Arweave for most people is a 2 or 3 minute operation in their applications. So it's really not that hard, but we'll just make sure, like, one-to-one, that you can do it as easy as possible. Yes, but there are other things that we can kind of go through that are a little bit deeper, but really this is a lower time commitment version of the Foundry program, which is actually pretty heavy, one might say, in the other track, that can just get you really the fundamental stuff you need if you're really just using Arweave to store some data. So maybe like NFT images or videos, or the UI for your DeFi application, or maybe some documents or encrypted data in a Web3 app. But the other track is for projects that are taking a serious approach to building decentralized permanent web applications on top of the PermaWeb. And here we're going to give you full stack assistance. So literally all of the help we possibly can to get you from idea generation, even before you have some vague idea of what you're going to do, all the way through to building the first version of your product, getting funding for it so you can quit your job and work on it full time, and then getting users and getting that thing adopted in the world. We've done this now for, I guess it must be around 50 projects, and probably about 20 of those projects are already now working full time on their PermaWeb apps. They've raised capital and they are their own bosses and they're building the decentralized web. Yeah, with us, which is just absolutely astonishing. And we're just super, super excited to bring through the next batch of founders like yourselves into that ecosystem. So here we're offering customized one-to-one help through every step of the process. And we really mean every step of the process. If you've never even thought about starting a company in this space as sort of a project, before, you have no idea how the operations infrastructure of that works. Who do you go to register with? How does compliance work? How do I pay employees? All of this stuff we've helped founders with before, and we're happy to help you with again. You could also be on the other side of the spectrum potentially. You don't have so much understanding of the dev side. So how do you get started building and hiring developers? We're here to help you with all of that stuff. And even if you're a seasoned founder, this is like your fourth startup, you've exited 3 before. But we're here to help you too in whatever way makes sense for you. And in some cases, we've worked with before, it's like people have got a lot of experience working in centralized or Web 2 style startups, but they don't know so much about crypto. So we can really offer some advice and would you say guiding hand to help you get started in that process. But I think the key thing to say here is that actually the fundamental idea of the Foundry is we'll just basically bend to whatever works for you guys. We are just here to support people building on top of the permaweb and making it successful. That's our, I was about to say full-time job. It's about 3 full-time jobs per person. It's our 24/7 occupation during these things. And we love the process too. It's amazing fun. Okay, so with all of that aside, some of you in the audience might not actually be aware of what decentralized web applications really mean in practice, and also perhaps the profit-sharing communities that come with them on top of the permaweb. So I figured I'd just spend a few minutes going through what that means, and then I'll be handing things off to Seb and Jesse, who can take you through some more of the specifics about how the program will actually work, when we're doing what, and everything you need on the operations and logistics side. Okay, so I'm guessing like 95% of you understand this already, but there's always some that mistake Arweave just as a decentralized storage system. And while that is part of the truth, it is not the whole truth. Arweave is a permanent ledger of information. So broadly speaking, this is a on-chain storage that scales, right? It's kind of like Bitcoin. You can put information into it, but you can put much more information into it. It's much, much cheaper, and it has sustainable incentives for replicating that information over time, using essentially an endowment structure. And on top of this protocol is a set of, I would say, community-driven protocol development effort that's created this thing we call the permaweb, which is a decentralized, permanent web of applications and knowledge kind of sewn together in the same way that the traditional web was, except everything inside is replicated all across the world, and so is censorship resistant, and it's backed by this endowment, and so it's truly permanent. So side note here might be that some of you might be aware of IPFS, for example. IPFS is essentially a content addressing layer. So it'll tell you, I will take you to a piece of content if it exists somewhere in the network. And so it sort of has these, consistent hashes is the right way to think about it. Well, Arweave is doing this other side of that. It says, yes, everything has a consistent hash, and you might even want to use IPFS to address that hash, to find your way to the data if it's really appropriate for your use case. But the Arweave is really focused on just making sure that that data is everywhere and is backed sustainably. Yes, so together this stuff builds what we call the permaweb, which is kind of, all this information available in web browsers, not just on laptops and desktops, but also on mobile too. It's available from everywhere. Okay, so our job here is to essentially decentralize web applications on top of this system. At least in this track, that's our focus. And what this looks like in practice is that because you've got decentralized decentralized data storage, you can serve your application as well as the data stored inside your application to your users from the permaweb directly. So you can build not just decentralized web pages, but full web applications. And in fact, Arweave is not quite Arweave, but at least the permaweb is a full stack approach to building decentralized web apps. Everything you can build in a centralized Web 2 style, you can also now build in a decentralized Web 3, if you will, style on top of the permaweb. So UIs as well as database querying, you can treat the Arweave as a database and index its content and query it as you like, as well as a smart contracting system we call SmartWeave on top, and even methods for running back-end nodes that perform compute off-chain, which can essentially deliver information that's necessary for the running of your application to users in a decentralized way. So the entire stack is here now. You can build properly decentralized web apps in a way that you really couldn't before. We see that there's a misuse of the word decentralized in the crypto industry in general, where what they really mean sometimes is that one component of the stack is decentralized. Perhaps you have a smart contract which is running on a decentralized smart contracting network. Well, Arweave is taking a different approach. Arweave says that no, the entire application must be decentralized in order to have censorship resistance and a whole bunch of other properties that we're going to go through in just a moment. So why do we think this is interesting? Well, we believe that the fundamental problem with web services today is that users are forced to trust companies. And this leads to all sorts of dubious, would you say, activities which make services worse for the users, as well as potentially even investors and other stakeholders. So there's a huge amount of trust in the way that web services are built at the moment. We see a new paradigm where we can move the services, the products, if you will, and turn them into protocols, because now those protocols can accrue value. And instead of having centralized companies that are sort of black boxes that are incentivized to extract value from the products that they're creating, we can have community-run services where everyone gets a say in how things are operated, and there's no, and they're highly transparent, and there's no sort of, hidden hierarchy of power inside the systems. Everything is transparent, everything is open, and everyone can take part in governing them. So web services as protocols has many significant advantages. The first, I would say, is that they preserve what we call consumer integrity. So this idea that once you have access to a web application, you can always have access to that web application in its current form or better in the future. And that sounds, to begin with, like a sort of academic point, like it wouldn't matter that much in practice, but it's quite the opposite, really. What this means in practice is that you just can't have the typical Web 2 product evolution, which leads to negative outcomes. So that typically looks something like this. You get a founder or two or three maybe that come together and they build a service at the beginning, and they launch it into the world, and people start to really like it, and it's available for free, and it starts to get some growth and attract people that are excited about it. And that's amazing, but this means that now that Web 2 founder set, they have increasing costs for every new user. They have to pay proportionately to the amount of usage of the system. And this forces them to do one of two things. They either have to push essentially revenue generation early, which can really crush growth, or they have to sell equity or potentially even tokens, depending on the system, actually, sell access to the future value accrual of the application to investors. And this is totally fine. The investor is essentially playing a game where they will bankroll the initial phase of growth such that once a moat is established, value can then be extracted back in orders of magnitude more than was given in the first place. In order to make the system coherent, essentially, in order to get the money back and more, and to return for their investors, the LPs of the funds, typically. This is a sort of fine way to act. It's what everyone is incentivized to do, but we think there can be a different way. So with consumer integrity, what we're saying is, okay, so if you access a PermaWeb app today, perhaps it's weve.email, a Weavemail client, and you like it, you think it's pretty cool, then you can start to use it, and you can have a confidence as a user that that application is not going to be, if you will, rug pulled from you. It's not going anywhere. You can always get back to it in its current state, or someone can issue a new version of the application, and if it's better, you can use it. And so now you get this sort of ratchet effect, where the quality of the application can only improve over time. Compared to, for example, to Gmail, right? So when you made your Gmail account 10 years ago, you had no idea what Gmail was going to, or Google, were going to do with your data at that time. You just sort of signed up and you probably didn't even think about it too much. But now you're locked into that service. And whatever Google decides to do to extract value from you, you're stuck with. You don't get a choice. So this is a really, really powerful property when you get into the details of it. It fundamentally changes the incentives and the power relationship between the developers and the users of an application. And this, for what it's worth, also we think means that other applications that are higher trust become possible in such a system, where in a traditional Web 2 model, you just couldn't do it. So potentially applications that play with healthcare data or something like this, where users would just be uncomfortable taking part in using the product if there was a centralized company that they knew could do dubious things with their data later. Yes, this is a very powerful way to even unlock a whole new class of applications that just wouldn't fly if we have these centralized companies intermediating it and this problem of non-consumer integrity. So another component is that they enable permissionless innovation. All of the data that you store onto the Arweave network is available to all other applications. And it's tagged, essentially, so those that database kind of functionality I was describing earlier allows you to query the network and say, hey, for example, give me all of the posts from this user or transactions from this user that have app name, I know, d-Twitter or whatever it happens to be, and I know, type that is a like or something like this. And so now, if there's a decentralized Twitter application, you can use that query to extract all of the records of things that this person has liked from that decentralized Twitter application and use it in your own application. And this is super powerful because it means basically everything is infinitely remixable. So in the same way that in the DeFi space on Ethereum, we saw this massive explosion of creativity, really, where people realized, hey, I can layer these DeFi protocols on top of each other and build new and more amazing, creations at every different level. And here we're applying that same principle, but to data. Now you can remix each other's data and contribute to each other's data set in a completely permissionless and completely permissionless and open way, which you just, of course, absolutely couldn't do in a Web 2 world. A fundamentally different game. And what's really neat about this is that this, of course, is something that Danny Grant and Nick from USV called developer integrity at the time. This idea that what you essentially are given here is more or less an API, right? But what's different about it is that that API can't be taken away from you. So I think the major learning, or one of the major learnings in the startup space from about 2007 to 2012 was, hey, don't build your application if it depends, or turn it into a startup at least, if it depends on API access to some other company's services. Because they might well turn those off someday. In fact, actually, it's often in the interest of those companies to weaponize API access, if you like, to crush competition. Whereas in this place, in this sort of sphere on the permaweb, you don't need to worry about that. If you build an application, you can be confident that you're going to have access to the data from that other application all of the time. So it's truly permissionless, and you get developer integrity, we call it. Applications on the permaweb are ownerless. Again, it sounds a little bit weird to start with, but you can think about this as the power relations inside the application are fundamentally different. So when you access anywhere on the centralized web today, you are accessing a server that is owned and controlled by someone else, typically a company, but sometimes individuals. And that means that they can control more or less what happens in its entirety in that domain. Twitter could tomorrow just decide, actually, Twitter was a terrible idea, let's turn it off. Or it could decide, we don't like anyone with this political leaning, so go away. In the permaweb, nobody owns a piece of data after it is published. And that means that you can build applications that have entirely different power structures. So to make this concrete, we could look at something like decent.land. Decent.land is building a Reddit-like system where there is no Reddit company. And this means that the communities inside that system are entirely self-governing. They have a DAO, so a sort of, for those not aware, you can think of it like a community with token representation of ownership that votes on content moderation policies and all the rest of it, and they self-govern. And because the application and the UI, the entire stack, is stored in the permaweb where it's decentralized and permanent, there is no company in the middle as an intermediary, which is just unbelievably powerful. It means now, when you start your community on decent land, you can be confident that Reddit isn't just going to turn around and throw you off in the future. There is no Reddit to do that. You and your other community members own your place in cyberspace. It's just something you fundamentally couldn't do before. Okay, so another one is that devs don't pay for compute. We have a theory that one of the reasons that open source web applications never really took off on the centralized web is actually very simple. It's that web applications require a deployment somewhere, and that deployment costs money. And the more people use the thing, the more money has to be paid. And so it just doesn't work with an open source software development model, because essentially the costs are accruing to the developer. Whereas if you contrast that with perhaps desktop software or server software, that can be open source, because if the developer sends the code to someone, it runs on their computer, right? And their computer is the one accruing the costs. And so this different sort of relationship is now mirrored on the permaweb. Developers can deploy their application, and if users want to interact with it, they pay very, very tiny fractions of a cent in order to do so, but they are the ones fundamentally paying. And that means that devs are freed of that problem. And so they can build open source web applications which have totally different business models or no business model at all. Yeah, in a way that, again, just wasn't possible in the Web 2 world. Kind of tangential, cool thing for developers is, well, once you deploy the thing and you get it right and it works, it just doesn't stop working. You don't have to do endless DevOps and maintenance work, and you don't have to pay every single month to maintain the thing, because you've committed the data and you've contributed to an endowment which can pay out over time for miners to replicate it. So you just don't need to do any maintenance at all. It's just kind of there once it's started. And this means that I'm using one of the first permaweb applications was a thing called Weave Watcher. I've been using it for 3 years now, and it hasn't changed a byte. And the original developer, I don't think they even remember building it anymore. But it just continues to work. So from the user's perspective also, the fact that there's zero maintenance for the developer is great, because it just means it just continues to work. And you don't have to worry that it's going to stop working. Whereas I think, Weave Watcher is a, I was going to say boring application. It's not boring, it's just small. It's like a plaything. No one cares about it too much. And so if the developer had to register a domain name, keep paying for that every year, and then pay every single month to keep this thing online via a server, yeah, they would have already stopped by now. But I can continue using Weave Watcher for 10 or 20 or 30 years if I want to. It just works and just continues to work. Okay, so those are just some of the reasons we are like hyper excited about permanent decentralized web applications. But on top of that, and that's kind of technical side of things, on top of that, there are what we call profit-sharing communities, which are just a fundamentally different way to create the business models that are sort of, if you will, the social structures around these web applications. So in a profit-sharing community, which is, if you're aware with kind of Ethereum usage of the word DAO, it's like that, except you share profit. You have multiple people that buy into the token that backs an application. And when they buy into it, they're buying into what is essentially a profit stream. So for example, with a decentralized Twitter system, you might have a moment where the user presses a button to post their tweet. And when you do so, as well as paying a tiny amount to the network to store that data for you, you can also pay a tiny amount to the profit-sharing community that built the application. And this means that if you hold that token, you just accrue what are essentially a set of micro dividends over time, giving you an APR on your investment, more or less. And that investment can be in monetary form, so you can buy the tokens from someone, but you can also print tokens to give to people in reward for them doing work on the application. So now you have a way to kind of buy into, would you say, buy in with your time to the profit that's going to be created by something. So a simple way of rewarding people for open source work, essentially. In these systems, we don't just use, typically at least, token value or token number weighted voting. Instead, what we do is we say, okay, well, even if you're a smaller holder of the tokens, if you're willing to lock those tokens for longer, then you should get a bigger stake in voting rights. So we calculate your voting power as simply the number of tokens you have multiplied by the time that you've got them locked for. And this ensures a much fairer style of governance. And it's also enforcing a system that you might call a futarchy. It's essentially that you are staked into the economic effect of the decisions you're making as part of the governance system around an application on the permaweb. So if you stake your tokens for 2 years, it gives you a higher voting power. And in that 2 years, you are now exposed to all of the tips that are generated, these micro dividends when people use your application. And so you really make sure that you're making good decisions in terms of governance, because you can't sell the tokens. You are really locked into the long-term prospects of the application in a way that just wouldn't be otherwise. This is really, really powerful for aligning incentives with the long-term value created by an application. There's also another component, which is, of course, like I would say, familiar to the crypto market, which is just early liquidity ensures market efficiency. So if things are going well, then people will buy into the project and more capital will accrue to it so that it can build bigger things, go bigger. And if things aren't going so well, if it's not being well managed and so on, then capital will fly from the application. So this really enforces fair and accurate, or at least ideally, fair and accurate capital allocation in the ecosystem. Ownership can be given as incentives. And this is essentially like the experiments that were being run in the DeFi space around yield farming, except here it's in usage mining. So when you use a Open Web application, you can give your users a small amount of the tokens in the system, essentially as a reward, like as an incentive. And this gets them staked into the platform that they're using. They become owners of it, if you will, relative to the amount that they're actually using the system. This can be really, really cool because it means that your users become the governors of the system in a way that is just completely impossible in the Web2 space. Okay, so that's a little bit about why we're excited about the Open Web ecosystem, whether it's decentralized web applications, all the way through to profit-sharing communities. Thank you all for listening. Yeah, and I just can't wait to work with you as we go through this process. Now we can pass it over to Seb and Jesse, who are going to take you through some more of the specifics about the program. See you all around, guys.
Thanks, Sam. Okay, so if you were interested in all what you just heard about the possibilities that you have for building a permanent web application and profit sharing community on Arweave, you're probably wondering, all right, so what about the specifics of the program? So let me share my screen with you and let's get started. All right, so for the specifics of the program, the first thing that you need to know is what are the goals here? The goals of the Open Web Foundry are to help you turn your idea into an MVP. And if you already have an MVP, then to take that successfully to market. And to achieve all of this in the span of 6 weeks. The way to do this is through a structured program that combines both regular events that are the core of our curriculum, as well as through flexible sessions addressing your specific needs in a timely manner. So you don't have to wait around until the next session. When you need some support, we'll be there for you. For the regular events, we have weekly deep dives and weekly community spotlights. The deep dives are classes on topics like token economics or mechanism design or fundraising fundamentals. Whereas the weekly community spotlight events, on the other hand, provide you with a chance to present what you're working on to the community and get immediate feedback to help you build faster. For the ad hoc sessions, you can expect specific workshops like how to build your permanent web app and how to build your profit sharing community, as well as one-on-ones covering any questions that you might have for your project. So these sessions can be scheduled in a flexible way to ensure that you get the support you need right when you need it. In addition to the regular and ad hoc sessions, we'll be providing you with constant personalized support. So, by far the fastest way to get answers to any questions that you might have is just joining the Arweave developer Discord. If you have a question and you post it on Discord, chances are that someone in the community has already faced something similar to what you're going through and will be able to help you out. But besides Discord, both Jesse, who is behind the scenes helping us with this event right now, and I will be available to you to help you with any program support that you might need and to guide you to the right resources at the right time. So after the 6 weeks, the program culminates with a demo day. And this demo day is a public event in which you'll have the opportunity to pitch to the community and to the most helpful investors in the Arweave ecosystem. And to help you prepare for demo day, which is obviously a big deal because you want to pitch properly, we'll be offering you individual pitch practice sessions as well as dedicated design support for your pitch decks. So you don't have to worry about getting beautiful decks. We'll be helping you out with that. And we'll also be honing your what it is that you want to say and helping you with the storytelling and all those important aspects of a high quality pitch. But it's also important to know that our support doesn't just end at demo day. After the program has ended, so after those 6 weeks, we'll be reaching out to the projects that we want to invest in, as well as supporting all projects that might be currently looking for funding. We'll also be offering marketing and communication support to those of you who will have just launched, and to make sure that you have a super successful go-to-market strategy. Okay, so if all of this sounds good to you, you might be wondering, okay, so how do I get started? What do I do now? So there are 3 main things that you can do right now to get started. The first, and by far the most important thing, is to head over to Gitcoin and to register your project. You don't need to be super specific at this point in time or provide many details on what your project is about, but it is very important that you register in order for us to be able to provide you with the support in a dedicated manner. Otherwise, we never really know who to reach out. Once you're registered, we'll email you with all the resources that you need to start building. So these are Google Calendar, shared calendar that you can add to your calendar so you can see and never miss out on an event. But in addition to just having that resource, you should also follow us on Twitter, so you can stay up to date on all the upcoming events and never miss out on anything. Third, you should, as mentioned before, you should really join Arweave's developer Discord and get acquainted with the community. Like, we have an amazing, amazing community. Everyone's super helpful. You're seeing it already in the chat here in Crowdcast. Everyone's very helpful, and it will help you get the answers that you need at the right time. Okay, so if you're eager to get started, I would suggest that we all head over to Gather Town. Hopefully someone's posting the link to the Gather Town space that we have right now. And let's chat about what you want to build. Thanks everyone for joining us. Looking forward to see all the amazing things that you're going to be building. See you around.